It creates bilirubin, the substance that causes bruises to turn yellow. Analysis showed that the stains contained very high levels of bilirubin, consistent with the trauma of crucifixion. And UV photography revealed one more incredible clue.
You can visually see these serum stains around the blood stains that were never visible until our team photographed the shroud with UV fluorescence photography approximately 2,000 years after this man ostensibly was killed.
Serum is the liquid medium in which red blood cells are suspended. It remained invisible until UV light made the dried serum fluoresce.
No medieval artist could have anticipated the invention of ultraviolet fluorescence photography and said, well, I'm going to hide this serum stain, and 700 years from now, they'll find it. Give me a break.
Ray Rogers and the team finished their research in 1978 with more questions than answers. The image might have been created by contact with a real body, but whose body was it? When had he died? And was he really crucified? Crucifixion was a gruesome, drawn-out and painful death, reserved for criminals and the lowest rung of Roman society.
You weren't nailed up there to kill you, you were nailed up to be crucified, tortured. They didn't want you to die right away. In fact, there were evidence that they were surprised that Jesus died so soon.
It's difficult to get scientific data on crucifixion because the last official Roman crucifixion happened in the year 337. But in a quiet suburb of New York City, one man's been experimenting with crucifixion for years. Forensic pathologist Dr. Frederick Zuckerby has investigated many gruesome crime scenes as chief medical examiner for Rockland County, New York.
My area was mechanism, manner, and cause of death and type of suffering the individual had.
Since 1948, Dr. Zuckerby has been investigating the shroud to answer a fundamental question. Does the evidence on the shroud match up with a person who died by crucifixion? First, the doctor built a cross to determine how crucifixion killed people. The assumption was that the victim suffocated under the weight of his own body. But the doctor's experiments suggested otherwise.
The cause of death was due to shock, which causes failure of the heart as a pump.
Next, he looked at how the nails were driven through the hand. The shroud shows a pool of blood near the wrists. But are human hands nailed to a cross strong enough to support a crucified body? The doctor designed special gloves to find out. His tests revealed that the nails would support the body. But he also made another startling find. The Roman practice of nailing the victim's palms to the cross would have ruptured the median nerve, turning the thumbs inwards. A careful examination of the shroud revealed exactly this. The thumbs were hidden underneath the palms, just as one would expect in a crucifixion. There are a number of other clues that the doctor's investigation found on the shroud.
Looking at the face, it was not symmetrical, showing evidence of a beating. I looked at the angulations of the blood in the head region where the crown of thorns was. The blood flows going along where the muscles will contract, and they had a corkscrew appearance. The blood shows a flow in the back of the hand, and it runs nicely along the side, and it accumulates a pool. I've seen it in many, many cases of injuries to the hand in the medical examiner's office.
From his research, the doctor came to one overwhelming conclusion about the image on the shroud.
From the forensic pathology point of view, it is totally consistent with a crucified individual. I have no doubts at all.
Dr. Zagaby's tests and the photographic evidence matched up. The victim on the shroud had been crucified. But was it Jesus Christ or a medieval man? To answer this crucial question, scientists had to find out how old the shroud was. And that required the cooperation of the Catholic Church. In 1988, scientists lobbied for permission to take a sample of cloth for carbon dating. Unknown to them, Pope John Paul II was already consulting his own scientific advisors and had reached a decision.
I was in Rome at the time, and there was this real tension, this real controversy as to whether this should be subjected to these scientific tests. I mean, if this is the burial shroud of Jesus, is that not an indignity to what is the only physical link to the Savior? And others would say, well, look, if this is a fraud, we need to know one way or another. And John Paul II, to his credit, and the Vatican, to its credit, said, no, we're going to put this to the knife, literally.
It was a historic decision. Scientists were finally given permission to carbon date the shroud. For this test, the sample would have to be burnt. Permanently destroying a piece of the shroud was a highly controversial action. The church authorities imposed strict conditions on the scientists, only allowing a small sample to be cut from a damaged corner of the shroud.
It was a convenient choice. It was in an area of a cloth that nobody was going to complain about. Nobody was going to take issue with the fact that they're pulling threads from the more pristine parts of the cloth.
The section removed from the damaged corner was divided into 4. One piece was sent to Oxford University, another to the Swiss Institute of Technology in Zurich, and 2 smaller pieces were sent to the University of Arizona. Dr. Tim Jull was a member of the Arizona team.
Everybody and all the plants and all the animals on the surface of this planet have approximately the same amount of carbon-14 in them as long as they're alive. When we die, the C14 in our bodies decays with a known decay rate. If we measure the carbon-14 in the sample and compare it to a standard, we can calculate the age from the ratio of the sample to the standard.
First, the shroud sample was cleaned of any impurities. Then it was burnt.
We start off with a piece of linen, and we combust it at this end, turning the carbon of that sample into a gaseous state.
The CO2 gas was then solidified, and the carbon was extracted. Each carbon sample was then shot through an accelerating mass spectrometer, which counted each individual carbon-14 atom.
This particle detector can count 1 atom at a time. For a modern sample, we count upwards of 100 atoms per second. For an old sample, one that's close to 50,000 years, we may count 5 or 10 atoms in 2 minutes.
By counting the number of atoms, scientists calculated the date. For the test, each lab worked in isolation. Finally, after checking and rechecking their results, they had the answer. They knew how old the shroud was.
We wanted to make sure we were right, so we measured it more times than we would regularly, and we knew that it wouldn't be 2,000 years old after 5 minutes. The Shroud of Turin turned out to be a medieval sample from the 14th century, and that's what the radiocarbon date shows.
The shroud was dated between 1260 and 1390. The result was a stunning revelation, making headlines around the world. It was now a scientific fact. The Shroud of Turin could not be the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. Despite the evidence, many of the faithful refused to accept the carbon dating results. Their belief in the shroud was unshakable. And soon they made a discovery that cast doubt on all the scientific work. By 1988, the Turin Shroud was the most controversial relic in the Christian world. Carbon dating had concluded that it was a 14th century fake and not the burial shroud of Jesus. But scientific tests also concluded that the image wasn't painted, and the cloth contained the chemical components of real blood. As a result, the faithful still believed that the shroud could be genuine, and the carbon dating flawed.
Here you have the most studied artifact in human history, and science still can't give us an answer.
Ray Rogers, a member of the team that conducted the first scientific investigation, had always kept an open mind about the shroud. But as a man of science, he was furious that the shroud believers started questioning the carbon dating evidence.
I'd been reading these things by people from the lunatic fringe who were explaining why the date was wrong. I was irritated and just getting mad. I don't have any faith at all in somebody who says, I think I see flowers on the shroud, or I think I see little sailing ships sailing along.
There are people who are so emotionally involved in this that they're not going to accept any scientific result. Their faith is not going to be shaken by some pointy-headed scientist.
In the remote mountains of Panama, one shroud believer's obsession was about to spark renewed interest in the shroud. Peter Sooms is a retired doctor and a 3D imaging expert who now works as an artist.
The Shroud of Turin is one huge message, a gift of God to the world.
While researching a sculpture, Dr. Sooms came across an image of the shroud, and it changed his life.
I have the feeling that that image touches the soul of people.
Using his medical skills, he started a remarkable project that would bring the still image to life.
I got an obsessive thought in my head, because I didn't know about radiocarbon dating, I didn't know nothing. The only thing that was clear in my head was, this is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ.
With the help of experts in Holland and Argentina, Dr. Sooms embarked on a complex process that would transform the face on the shroud into a 3D holograph.
I got the idea that there was holographic information in the Shroud of Turin. The image was divided into lots of slices. Then we put these pieces all together until it formed a 3D. So what we have in the computer now is the face of Jesus Christ in 3 dimensions.
After 3 years of painstaking work and computer processing, the 3D image of the body was complete. According to Dr. Sooms, this is the actual face of the historical Jesus, captured just moments after death, when he was wrapped in the shroud.
When I saw the results the first time, it really touched me emotionally very much. People start crying spontaneously when they stand in front of these images. And I've seen people change their life completely. It changed my life.
Publication of the image ignited fresh interest in the shroud, but it didn't prove the linen cloth was genuine. Shroud believers had to embrace scientific methods if they were to have any hope of challenging the carbon dating result. And in the United States in 2000, 2 people did just that.